Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started so that anyone that shows up late, they're just going to miss all the best parts because I put the best parts of this right in slides 1, 2, and 3, so they're going to miss it all. My name is Dennis Machado. I am the safety manager for WorkLogic HR. I always like to tell people I have one of the most interesting jobs in all of safety because I get to see all different kinds of facilities in all different types of industries, from restaurants to hospitals, surgery centers, chemical manufacturing plants, woodworking facilities. I get to see a lot of different stuff. And with that, I get to see a lot of really good stuff, and I get to see a lot of stuff I take pictures of so I can put it in PowerPoint presentations. So today's topic is common safety program missteps. So these are some of the basic things that no matter what industry you're in, people make these types of mistakes. So today we're going to be going over, one, injury and illness prevention programs, kind of an overview of what the IIPP is, and then some common mistakes that people make, supervisor and employee training, incentive programs, and then we always want to go over Cal OSHA's top 10 most cited list, which there will be some interesting facts about that. And then the best part of the whole thing is photos from the road, so actual examples of some of the most cited infractions from just everyday hazard assessments. So getting into the injury and illness prevention program, Cal OSHA has a couple of different model programs that you can find online. They have the high hazard industry model IIPP. They have a low industry or a low hazard industry IIPP. They have an intermittent workers IIPP, and then they have an intermittent workers for agricultural IIPP. So these programs are online and are free to be used by anybody. They all, regardless of whether it's a high hazard or a low hazard, contain these 8 elements. Okay, so the first element here, which you should never give me a laser pointer because I'm just going to start going all over the place with this thing. So the first element is responsibility, and this is just kind of in a nutshell, you identifying who the responsible person is with the authority to implement the IIPP. Compliance means essentially, how do you ensure that your employees comply with your health and safety policies and procedures? Communication is how do you communicate and when do you communicate with your employees about your health and safety work practices and procedures. Hazard assessments, so when and how do you conduct your assessments for potential exposures to your employees. Accident exposure investigation really is how do you investigate and when do you investigate an incident or potential incident or illness in the workplace. And then hazard correction are your methods that you use to correct any hazards that you do find. Training and instruction, when you train, what you train on with your employees in the workplace. And then record keeping is what do you keep? Do you keep your hazard assessment forms? Do you keep your training documentation, your hazard corrections, and how long you keep those? So that's kind of in a very, very brief nutshell of what the IIPP is. Now, the common mistakes that we often find is in this example here, I originally had screenshotted the actual communication part of the IIPP, but it was blurry, so I had to go and retype it so you could actually read it. So this is taken from Cal OSHA's high hazard industry IIPP, and it's in their model program. And so the most common mistake that I come across in all different types of industries is they will go online, print it off, type in their company name, put in a name, hit print, throw it in a folder, and put it up on a shelf. Okay? So now, all of a sudden, if you do not actually read what this communication, for example, section is telling you, okay, these bullets right here are essentially your policies. So what you have in your IIPP in these little bulleted sections are what you're required to do. Okay, so the number one example that I see as far as an issue is the second bullet there, review of our IIPP. I go through worksites and I'll talk to employees, ask them about training or ask them about any other written programs, And I'll ask them, have you seen your IIPP? And what do you think the most common response I get back is? What's an IIPP? Okay, so, but if you're a company that does that and OSHA ever did show up to your work site, they're going to go, great, you review your IIPP with your employees. Can I see documentation of that? And I've seen that happen where they go through word by word, section by section, and go, that's great. Do you have documentation of that? No. They start scribbling notes like you're taking a driver's test and the guy has a clipboard. Okay? That's a situation you don't want to be in. Ooh, backwards. Okay? The next one that happens on a regular basis is this second to last one here. A system for workers to anonymously inform management about workplace hazards. What do you think that means? It's really a suggestion box, right? Come in, drop in your suggestion. It's anonymous. Okay, you can make your recommendations without any fear of your supervisor knowing, okay, on what you said. Now, people leave this in all of the time, and when they read that, they go, that's great. You have a suggestion box. No. Well, do you have another form for that? No. That becomes a problem. Okay, so then this last one down here is really talking about safety committees. If you leave that in your IIPP and you don't actually have a safety committee, there's actually more requirements if you do have a safety committee that you have to follow. One, for example, is that you have to meet at least quarterly. Okay, so if you have that in there and you're not following the standards for a safety committee, you're exposing yourself to problems, or potential problems, I should say. So anything that you have in your IIPP really is binding. If you say you do A, B, and C, and something happens because your employees were doing X, Y, and Z, that's a big deal, because you have in writing that you do A, B, and C. But X, Y, and Z is what your actual work practice is. Something's not going to match up, and you're opening yourself up to a potential issue. So the next section we can talk about is training and instruction. Again, this is coming straight from Cal OSHA's model high hazard IIPP. Okay, and the second bullet point here, I'm just going to read the first couple of words. So when do you provide training and instruction? To all new employees. Okay, what I see constantly is I'm short-staffed, I'm going to hire John, John's going to come in, fill out his paperwork, and go get him. Okay, I haven't trained John on anything about our facility, evacuation routes, the fire safety, anything that kind of general employees have to be trained on, but I also didn't train him on how to use the widget maker. Okay, now John is using a piece of equipment that he hasn't received any training on. What happens if John cuts his finger off? Oops. You're not going to have any documentation that you attempted to protect John. Yep, sorry. I'm really mobile, so I'll try to be stationary. I have a pedometer. I'm trying to get to like 10,000 steps every day. So the issue is that if you send an employee out into the field or out into your workforce without providing them the training beforehand to help protect them, okay, you're potentially opening yourself up to some problems. The next one that we run into quite a bit is this third bullet here. To all workers given new job assignments for which training has not previously been provided. What do you think an example of this that happens all the time is? Yeah. That one happens a lot. How about if I work in Department A and 3 people in Department B didn't show up today? So we're going to kind of shift some things around because my department's slow. So now I go into Department B to get some work done. Have I been trained on any of the processes or procedures? No. I know a guy who just got hired at a construction company, and he's never worked a day in his life in the construction industry, never used heavy equipment. They hired him to operate one of those giant graders, kind of leveling out dirt to make a neighborhood. His training was, you'll figure it out. This is 2015, pretty common knowledge on things that you need to do and things that you shouldn't do, but it still happens on a regular basis. And then kind of going on here. So whenever a new substance, process, or procedure, so anytime I'm in Department A and we're making widgets and I get a bigger, better product or machine and I throw it in the workplace, oftentimes the training is kind of on the job as you go. So we're going to figure out this machine, what it can and can't do as we operate it. Anytime you bring in a new process, a new machine, you could change chemicals that you're using for the same process. If it's a different process or substance, you need to train your employees on that change. So those are some kind of common mistakes that happen with IAPPs. So the thing to really stress is whatever you have written in those 8 components of your IIPP, you need to make sure you're actually doing and that they're accurate. Because again, if one says A, B, and C, but you're doing X, Y, and Z, you're going to be held to A, B, and C because that's what you have in writing. Okay, so that's a really important part of this. Okay, other common mistakes with an IIPP. And it depends on what industry you're in. A lot of times the oil and gas industry the things they require can be extreme. But a general industry, a machine shop, or could be an office building or a doctor's office, okay, the number of programs or things you need to have in place are a little bit different. So this is an example of something too big. Okay, that's your written program. You are held to every single word in there. So can you, let's say that's yours. Can you tell me what's on page 396? Should, because you're going to be held accountable for that. Okay, so sometimes more isn't better. Okay, it just gets too big, and you're not really going to remember what's on page 396. Okay, so when you look at an IIPP, how many components were in the IIPP? 8 components, right? This document here has this entire section is their IIPP. Has anyone had OSHA show up on their worksite before, or had an inspection or an injury or any of that stuff? One of the first things they asked you for was your IIPP, right? If you're handing them this, which this one includes a hazard communication program and includes a lockout tagout program in their IIPP, which aren't a part of the 8 components. Okay, so if you're handing them all of this information right off the gate, you're kind of setting yourself up potentially for some problems. So this one, it's like, I want to say about 50 pages long of an IIPP. And that's just, it has more than the 8 components. So it's more than what you actually need for an IIPP. Whereas this one, we wrote for this client. I'll turn around this way so you can't see who they are. So it went from 50 pages to 8. This is the components that they need, and it covers all aspects of the IIPP. Okay, so you want to have what you need to have, but you don't need to have more than that, specifically in your IIPP. Now, getting into other written programs, okay, the detail of those programs kind of depends on also contracts, for example. One of our clients just had to go through a Tesoro audit. So they're a sign company. All the gas stations around that area that are owned and operated by Tesoro, they had to go through, it's ISNet World or whatever that's called. So there were 467,000 programs that they had to write. So essentially we created them an entire case of encyclopedias that they had to submit online to be able to get that contract. So too big is a problem. But the next one is be careful of what you purchase or what you download. There's a lot of great companies out there that can provide you with really good assistance with your safety programs, because it can get really technical and it can get somewhat confusing depending on what type of program you have to have in place. So when I say be careful of what you purchase, in this example here, they have a lockout tagout program. Does anyone not know what lockout tagout is? So essentially lockout tagout is the control of hazardous energy. And there's different types of hazardous energy, but think of it as like a machine that is hardwired into a wall, so you have to have a disconnect and you have to be able to shut it off and isolate the power, so if I go to work on it, it doesn't automatically start up and a serious injury happens. So you have to be very specific within that program and write out essentially machine-specific procedures, okay, for each type of machine, or really each type of machine, how it's shut off differently. So if you have a bank of machines that could be different types of machines, but they're all isolated the same way, it's one policy or procedure. But it has to be that specific to your workplace. And they bought this program, and they probably spent thousands of dollars on this, and it gives them all of the basic, your general procedures, your general cord and plug procedures, and it gives you that general stuff. But when it gets to the machine-specific part of this program, the pages are blank because they were supposed to go in and hand write in, well, what are you paying for? Isn't that what you're paying somebody to help you with? So they have a lockout-tagout program that they got, this big binder, threw it on a shelf. We're good, we got written programs. Not really, because it's incomplete. It doesn't have what it actually requires. Okay, so when you purchase things, you have to make sure that it actually goes through the detail, and that goes with downloading too. Has anyone here ever downloaded a program or anything online? I do it all the time, come on, don't lie. Okay, Dr. Google's a great source for information. Okay, you can find all kinds of good programs. One of the best ones, if you want to go, is University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Their environmental health and safety link on their site. It's phenomenal. They have example programs for everything. But when you download a program, was it written specifically for you? It's written by somebody else. You might like a section or a part, but you have to make sure if you're going to use it that you thoroughly go through there and make it specific to your work site. Because that's what these programs are really about. They're about your work site and your employees. So if you print off a program that you find online because it looks good and you like the different parts, that's great, but you have to make it specific to your work site and your employees in order for it to be effective. So a lot of times people will download something, and as you're going through there, like I've actually seen other companies' names still in there, like, uh-oh. So you have to make sure of what's in there, and you really have to be thorough as far as what you're putting out. Okay, so be careful about purchasing or downloading those programs. And then programs versus training. This one happens quite a bit. Not every exposure in the workplace necessarily needs a written program, or not every potential exposure in the workplace needs a written program, but you might need to provide training. And one of the examples I like to use for this is bloodborne pathogens. Okay, I was at a training a year ago, give or take, and the person leading the training was really good, but when he got to bloodborne pathogens, he asked the person in the front row, what do you do? Oh, we have a warehouse. Okay. Do you have a bloodborne pathogens program? No. You're in violation. What? So this person was kind of scrambling. What do you do? Well, okay. Just because, let's say, for example, your supervisor might be certified in first aid. Would you say a warehouse and how they define bloodborne pathogens an occupational exposure to your skin, your eyes, mucous membranes, to blood or other potentially infectious materials? Okay, would you say someone that works in a warehouse has an occupational exposure? Now, are they certified in first aid? Yeah. In an emergency, could they actually, put a compression on a serious cut where there's blood? Yeah. You don't need an exposure control plan, but would it be a good idea to train them? There's the difference. Okay? So you might not need the exposure control plan, but it's always a good idea to train them. So you have to be careful as far as what programs you have, because if you have a program in place that you don't need, are you still accountable for every word that it says? 100%. So if you have an exposure control plan in your documents, and for some reason Cal OSHA gets a hold of it, they're going to go like this. Well, it says you do this. Can you show me documentation? Then they're going to write on a little notepad. Okay? So you have to be careful of what programs you have versus which ones you need, and you might not need the program. Training will suffice. Okay? Any questions on that? Or anything thus far? I'm kind of plowing through this thing pretty quick, so I'm going to start to slow down. Supervisor and employee training. Okay, where I see a lot of the issues is what's actually required versus what isn't. Okay, so that handout that you guys have, I took right from here. I kind of tweaked it a little bit for my own department's good. I just separated all employees at the top. So whether you work at a hospital, an office building, or you build atomic bombs for a living, okay, all employees have to complete these trainings on the schedule that they actually list. Then the next little section on page 1 just talks about all supervisors. Okay, so the supervisors, this is what's required of your supervisors in addition to what all of the other employees have. And then on page 3, you can see what it says at the very top, assigned or exposed employees. Okay, so this is where it gets specific to the actual industry or the specific worksite exposures. Okay, so from the get-go, you can look at the employee section on page 1. Okay, it says, I think it's the second to last one, job hazards. So that is fairly vague, right? And then on top of which your IIPP in the training and instruction section outlines all of those requirements, and the last one there, essentially, to kind of summarize it, says any potential exposure. Okay, so if you have to train your employees on job hazards, and your IIPP says you're going to train your employees on any real potential exposure, but let's say, for example, driving. There's nothing in these requirements here that are on, again, that's a screenshot from their website for training. There's nothing in their requirements to say anything about training your employees on driving a vehicle. But could driving a vehicle be considered a workplace exposure? Absolutely. If I deliver mail for WorkLogic once a week, I'm driving a company vehicle, that's a workplace exposure. There's nothing in there that says I have to train, but the catch-all that they have in there is that job hazards, and your IAPP essentially is like the general duty clause of federal OSHA, where the general duty clause kind of is federal OSHA's catch-all. So the IIPP becomes that. So in there, it talks about all of the different training requirements and the ways that you're going to train your employees and on what. And then they outline, Cal OSHA outlines, all of the different subjects. But just because it's not listed doesn't mean you don't necessarily need to train them on it. Okay, so that job hazard one covers everything, even if it's not listed. Now, another interesting one in the supervisors section, this one just happened for our company. It was one of our clients. If you look at first aid and CPR in the supervisors little area, I don't remember how many down it is. Okay, second one. Okay, so first aid and CPR for your supervisors. What I did was, or actually let me give you the example. We have a grocery store in the middle of Bakersfield, right in the middle of a big city. One of their employees, for some reason, put their finger in a bread roller, and they lost a piece of it. And they lost a sliver of bone, which makes it a what? An amputation. So now you got to call Cal OSHA and report it, okay, which obviously a finger amputation, they're going to show up. And they did. And one of the things they cited was first aid and CPR for your supervisors. Okay, so looking at what they actually state, here are the regulations that they list in your kind of handout of training topics. Okay, so first aid kit, which is 3439 first aid kit, agricultural. Then you have logging and sawmill, general industry, confined spaces, bloodborne, tree work, and diving operations. So we're going to stay with the general industry since that kind of is what applied to our recent client, and that's the 3400. General industry, this is what they say regarding who has to provide their employees first aid training. Okay? In the absence of an infirmary, clinic, or hospital in near proximity to the workplace, which is used for the treatment of all injured employees, a person or persons shall be adequately trained to render first aid. So training shall be equal to that of the American Red Cross and the mine safety. Okay, now, in your opinion, based on the regulation, do they need to provide their supervisors first aid training? They're in the middle of a big city. How many medical clinics and how many hospitals are around? I mean, would you consider, 3-4 blocks over, near proximity? Does anyone have an idea of a time frame of what near proximity is? Yeah?
Well, I don't know when we're talking about, I'm in the agriculture industry, so we're talking about restrooms being available. Their proximity is a 5-minute walk or a quarter-mile drive. So I don't know if that's kind of what we consider.
It's right along those lines. And so in here, near proximity is not defined. You cannot find in any regulatory text what near proximity means. Okay, so what I do, and hopefully some of you guys do this as well if you have questions, call Cal OSHA Consultation. They're great at answering your questions. You can tell them, yeah, my name's John Silver, and I work for someone. They're just there to help, okay? They're not going to call you back with anything. They're not going to enforcement. It's a phenomenal resource. I have a guy there that I've kind of befriended. I got him on speed dial. So I shoot him a text, but it's a great resource to be able to call Cal OSHA Consultation, okay? And this is what he told me. It's not defined anywhere, 4 minutes, okay? 4 minutes of medical service. And the reason is, at the 5th, brain damage could start to occur if your heart stops beating. So OSHA uses 4 minutes. So you could be in the middle of the biggest city in the world with a hospital 1 block over. Doesn't matter. Are they going to get there in 4 minutes? So in order to verify that, you have to call your nearest, let's say, fire station or ambulance hall or wherever and ask for their average response time to your location. If it's above 4 minutes, you need to train your employees in first aid or your supervisors. Yes?
All of our employees are required to have CPR. So do the supervisors have to have further amount if everybody has it?
What industry? Physical therapy? That would probably fall under the general industry. Well, because there's no blood involved, right? In physical therapy, or is there? Contact physical therapy? Okay. I guess it would depend on if the actual bloodborne pathogen standard 5193 applies to your work location. So if it's an occupational exposure, okay, well then that kind of changes the answer a little bit. Everyone's going to want to be, obviously trained in bloodborne pathogens. From a first aid standpoint, again here, this is the actual requirement. Does it say CPR? So this is just Cal OSHA. Now, other people have different agencies or different regulatory areas that come into play. Like, for example, a good one is drug testing. There's nothing in Cal OSHA that says anything about having to have a drug and alcohol policy in your health and safety programs. But DOT does, and DOT has all sorts of requirements for random screens and all of that stuff. So if you have another, like a lot of our medical facilities have these accreditation standards they have to meet, and that might be one of those. But from a Cal OSHA standpoint, as far as your supervisors, I would have your supervisors absolutely train in first aid. Yeah. But your question was CPR?
First aid. Do they have to have more than just proper medical?
More than.
Is there more training for a supervisor's position than there is just a general?
Okay, so the question was, is there more training required for a supervisor than an employee? And the answer is yes. Okay. specifically for first aid or just in general, if it's specifically for first aid, I'm going to say the answer is no, because first aid is first aid. But where supervisors come into play is now they have accident reporting and investigation, which is a part of your IAPP. They have to be trained on that, so your company's procedures on how you want them to investigate incidents, how they talk to witnesses, all of the record-keeping procedures that go along with that. There's also specific training on hazards in the workplace. So your supervisor that works in Department A needs to be very familiar with the potential hazards and exposures in Department A, how to safely deal with them, how to talk to their employees about them. Any written programs you have about them, they need to be aware of what they are and how to supervise that. So there is additional training required for supervisors. First aid, this is going through the American Red Cross. That's kind of specifically what they list. So if it were me and I, was in charge of that facility, they would get what they're asking, what Kalish is asking for, the American Red Cross. First aid. I wouldn't even throw in CPR necessarily because it doesn't actually say CPR. But nowadays it's just a combo class, so might as well do both. So the thing about the training is, number one, yeah.
Well, I work in the oil and gas industry, so I'm supposed to have regularly. And the reason why first aid is kind of like the baseline, because anything more than that will require like EMT services.
Right, it could be considered medical treatment.
Medical treatment.
Yeah.
So if the supervisors aren't trained in EMT, then first aid is where they stop. After that, they'll be held responsible if they try to administer medical treatment and make it worse. So we're only held to CPR first aid, and we do have EMTs out there.
Right.
Like Chevron, so they're always a phone call away. But once we administer CPR and first aid, if we have to, that's as far as we go, and we're waiting for paramedics to show up to take over from there.
Yeah, you get into working out in oil fields or remote locations, this thing changes dramatically. This is just general industry, your grocery store in the middle of town. That's kind of a general industry. But you get into agricultural, you get into oil and gas, things go way up from there because of the proximity or the location of the actual field itself. Things change. But we were just kind of going to go over the example of that general industry. Any questions or anything on training? I know we kind of been going in amoebas, not circles. Okay, the next one is forklifts. Does anyone here have forklifts at their facility? Okay, so I see this one a lot, and everyone has gotten these emails, have seen these. Very good companies at providing train the trainer certificates, right? Okay, so as they kind of say here on their website, we offer forklift instructor train the trainer courses that will prepare you to become a certified forklift instructor. Okay? These are all over the place. Now, what they actually say about training your employees on how to use a powered industrial truck is here at 3668. Number one, under the direct supervision of persons who have the knowledge, training, and experience. Does it say certificate? No. Okay, the next two are really about the types, so consisting of a combination of formal training, classroom, practical. But number 4 gets into, again, all operator training and evaluation shall be conducted by persons who have the knowledge, training, and experience to train powered industrial truck operators. Okay, so that's what they require, knowledge, training, and experience. Doesn't say certificate. So these companies, again, they do a good job, and for some it's really worth it just to go to get the actual training materials and some DVDs, so now you can take it back to your work site and you have kind of a ready-made program. But it's not required. And here, I'll give you 2 examples. Let's say Jane has worked on and around and with forklifts for 15 years. Okay? Very experienced on the 3 types of forklifts at her facility. Now, the safety manager there works with her on training employees. Okay? Mentors her, goes through the materials, how it's done, when it's done, why it's done. Okay, now Jane, all of a sudden, leads a course in the classroom, talks about site-specific things, has a video potentially or a PowerPoint, and then she goes out and does the practical training. Okay, would you consider 15 years experience to qualify for that? Would you consider a safety manager or a director or somebody who's been doing that for a considerable amount of time, walking her through how to do it and mentoring her on forklifts? That would cover training, and she definitely has the knowledge based on the experience. She didn't go to the trainer course. She wouldn't need to. Now, on the flip side, I have a client who she is a part owner of this company and wanted to make sure her forklift operators were trained. She has about 35 seconds of forklift time, went to a train the trainer course, passed it, got her materials. She is certifying all of her operators. Just because she went to the train the trainer course does not make her experienced, does not make her knowledgeable, okay, to train her employees. Okay, so just because you might get an email, you might see something, number one, train the trainers, that certificate is not a requirement for Cal OSHA to certify your operators. Now, experience is a requirement, knowledge is a requirement, and I'm not saying those are bad. They can be a good supplement. I went to the one over at West Tech, just kind of the general one. That's a good course. I mean, for somebody without a lot of experience in forklifts, you're going to pick up a lot of good stuff. Going to additional training is never a bad thing. And again, you might pull out some material and be able to take it back and use it at your work site. But it's not a requirement to go through the train the trainer course. Okay? It's one of those kind of tricks where another one of our clients just paid, man, I don't know, it was like $2,000 to send a couple of employees through this thing. He's like, well, I got my guys certified to train, our employees. Well, thanks for calling us. We could have given me the $2,000 and I could have saved you the trouble. But so that's just another example of kind of training. Pay attention to what it actually says and don't necessarily fall into those marketing gaps or marketing traps that people will send out with the big alert like, you're out of compliance. You might not be. Okay, incentive programs. I see this one a lot, and a lot of kind of what I'm basing this next little section off of is in 2012, Federal OSHA sent out a memo or a directive, if you will, talking about employers potentially discriminating against their employees for reporting injuries. And some of the examples that they cited were based on incentive programs. Okay, so anyone that reports an injury or illness ruins it for the whole group. That could potentially be a form of discrimination. I won't get into discrimination. That's Katie's over there. She can talk to you about that. I'll run away. But with incentive programs, really, there's two things. What they call a disincentive program is essentially solely focusing on the numbers. Okay, how many workplace incidents? How many lost time accidents did you have? Okay, and that's really what could happen is you're going to discourage your employee from reporting that incident. If we all work in Department A and at 365 days we get a $500 bonus, and at day 335 I go, am I really going to want to have all of you look at me because I'm the one reporting an injury on day 335 that cost you each $500 cash? I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to limp around like this for another month, and then I'll turn it in. Okay, so essentially, whether it's directly or indirectly, okay, we're making it difficult or preventing an employee from turning in an injury. Incentives, okay, they encourage or reward workers for reporting injuries, for reporting illnesses, near misses, hazards, and even really participating in the process behind safety, which there isn't really anyone that I've ever met in the safety world whose number one goal is to make sure everyone goes home in the same condition that they showed up in. I used to say 10 fingers and 10 toes, but then I met a guy who had 8 fingers. So it's like, well, you showed up with 8. As long as you leave with 8, we're still in good shape. So going through, so what in safety incentive programs, or with safety incentive programs, focusing solely on the what is sometimes or oftentimes inaccurate and misleading. So when we focus on this, and everyone's seen this sign, right? Okay, no recordable injuries, no lost time incidents, focusing solely on incident rates, and focusing on loss ratios. So a couple of things here, all of these are reactionary. There's nothing preventative in nature about focusing on no recordable injuries. That's great, okay? Do not always reflect performance. And I have seen example after example after example of a company that has that up there and it says 9,470. And then you see some guy, walking with a, gas can smoking a cigarette. Or he's welding with a cigarette in his mouth without wearing any PPE. You're like, what are you doing? Okay, so great, you've gone 345 days without a recordable incident. Congratulations. But your work practices are atrocious. Okay? And what that's really doing is just masking the fact that at some point that volcano is going to erupt. And when it does, it's going to be big because you're not going to have anything in place. You're not going to have trained any of your employees. You're not going to have any documentation on anything. But yet, according to this, because no one reports injuries, because they want to get their incentive, everything looks good. So just because you've gone 365 days without an injury doesn't mean necessarily you've done a good job. And a lot of it is just based on luck. I mean, I've walked into a facility and just went, how are the walls still standing? Like the things that you guys are doing, well, our mod rate's 80. Well, it's soon to be 280. And usually within a year or two, I'm looking at my boss going, I told you to drop those guys, go here. So just the end result isn't necessarily a good way to focus on this. So focusing on the how, the what is accomplished is the important part. Getting people involved or rewarding people for work practices, using the appropriate PPE, helping with JHA creation and editing, clean department assessments. These are all kind of examples of ways to reward your employees on the process, because when you focus on the process of minimizing your risk or protecting your employees, which is the how, it's generally the most efficient, productive, and accurate way to reduce workplace incidents. Going through, OSHA's, I'm kind of speeding up because I'm looking at the clock. OSHA's top 10 in 2014, these are the top 10 most cited regulations. So fall protection, hazard communication, scaffolding, and so on. Has anyone here ever kind of looked at these on a regular basis? Okay, let's look at 13, 12, and 11. Any difference? I mean, a couple flip-flopped here and there. Every year, the same 10 are on their top 10 list. So the thing to take away from that, if you have any of these 10, you might want to make sure you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, because if something happens within those 10, they're going to be there. Okay? There's a reason why they're in the top 10 every single year. All right? So it's always interesting to look at 2014, 13, 12, 10. You can go on to 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. It's going to be the same 10. Okay, so getting to the really the fun part of this whole thing are photos from the road. So this year I tied these to Cal OSHA's top 10 most cited. So these are all photos that I've taken at all different random types of facilities. Okay, so number 1, fall protection. This is a forklift, right? Basket. It's actually secured to the forklift, but what's he missing? Yeah. How about this one? That's in a shop. See the ladder? Let's go up there and get some stuff down. Yeah, no guardrails. Okay, that again is an issue with fall protection. This is kind of a bad photo, and I blame Kelsey in the back for letting me keep this one in. She should have edited this one out. But anyway, this is a warehouse. Essentially, it's a loading dock. But the problem is they don't use it. They don't have any trucks that show up. It's just a facility they took over, and so they leave it open to let air in. So now, would they consider that a loading dock? It's an elevated surface. So since it's an elevated surface, it needs to have rails. It needs to be protected. This one, those look really nice. The owner of that building did them himself, painted them, and they look sharp. But what do you think could be the problem here? Yeah, there's a couple of things. Yeah, right here, there's no mid-rails. The actual chain here should be a mid-rail with that as well, but the chain is just secured by kind of wrapping around the actual post. And I highly doubt, and I didn't test it out myself by leaning up against it up top, is I doubt that that will withstand 200 pounds of force in a little area. I didn't want to find out because I didn't want to fall down, but nonetheless, it looks good though. This is a good one. This is a acetylene plant. Okay, it's kind of hard to see. Can you guys see that right there? Truck kind of backs in at an angle. Didn't quite all the way get his dock plate onto the loading dock. They roll those cylinders of compressed gases onto the truck. You're leaving a little gap there. Have you ever seen one of those explode? It's like a missile. Okay, so you're just increasing the chance, but also from an employee standpoint of falling off. And this is one of my favorites. They created a railing system of 55-gallon drums of chemicals. Ingenuity at its best. And then they attached a chain over here at the opening that starts on the wall, attaches to some compressed gas cylinders, and then attaches to a 55-gallon drum of an oxidizing chemical. Again, that's probably not a good place for you to want to work. Hazard communication. Missing labels. I don't know what this is. Should we store gas potentially? Or let's just go ahead and kind of dump stuff all over unmarked containers of chemicals. This one I like. Oily rags, 55-gallon drums of used oil. How about your water supply right behind it? That's really not where I want to drink. This one, things are labeled, but you probably want to maybe cover that up with a little bit of gravel before somebody sees that, or actually not let it spill, get some proper containment. How about this? What can you see with a problem here? What's that? Rags in the box? Yeah, I think that's paper. But how about that label? We can tell it's a corrosive because it says corrosive, but we don't know anything else because the label's gone. So let's say I get that on me. You're going to go to the SDS book, and what are you going to look up? I don't know. Maybe just guess. Google corrosive and just kind of go from there. This is a good one. This is actually a very, very nice medical facility. Secondary container labels. Okay, this has to have a label, and with the new GHS requirements, the label actually has, your product identifier, your pictogram, signal words, and all of those types of things. Okay, so these need to have a label. Now, is there a time where you can have a secondary container without a label? There is, yeah. If I have like a 5-gallon bucket of something and I pour it into a spray bottle, and I use that spray bottle for my job, and when I'm done, I dispose of it and rinse it out, I don't need a label on there because I'm the one in control of it and I know it's in the substance. But as soon as I leave that here and I walk away and go to another room, now it has to be labeled. So putting this in your cabinet has to be labeled. If it was something I just handled the entire time, it doesn't. Respiratory protection. Generally, the fines come from training, come from pulmonary exams, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say you do not want to store your forced air or supplied air respirator this way, and you might not want to use this one. I don't know how long it had been sitting there, but it's all crusty and cracked along here. I doubt that the actual cartridges would do anything for you. It might make you worse, depending on what's in there. Forklifts. I don't know what people, this happens all the time, but the bigger concern here is they took the seatbelt off because it kept getting in the way when they sat down. So let's just go ahead and remove it, okay? This is a good one. So woodworking facility down in LA, the space is so tight, they travel with loads in the air because they don't have room down low. So let's just go, now I'm going to go ahead and say the 35 seconds of experience who went and got that's her facility. Okay, so, but this is up high, forklifts running. He got out to move the table so he could drive by. Big problems. Different facility, but probably not a good idea to leave this parked, load up high. One of our clients actually had a claim where somebody walked into a warehouse and turned, and the forklift was parked like that and went right across the nose. That ruined that person's weekend. Here's another example of that woodworking facility. That's how tight they keep it, so they travel up above. Do you guys see what's underneath that load? That's a person. That load went right over these people and all of these people working along that line. One little slip, that thing comes off, you have some major, major problems. Lockout, tagout. I'm not picking on that woodworking facility, I promise. It's just they have a lot of good material. Okay, so big industrial bandsaw. He has the power off, but what is it not? It's not locked. He was going from the saw out to the parking lot to his truck, to the saw, back to the parking lot with his truck, okay? Hence, having to tag and lock that out. This one actually makes me really sad because this guy I talked to, he was servicing this machine, and there's his power in the on position. Talked to him, but he's like, I know, they've talked to me about it. About a month later, he stuck his finger in between those two wheels, thump, off it went. Wow. So, and it's, whenever that happens and I can put it together, I talk to him about it. I know who it is. So we have thousands and thousands of employees. I'm from San Diego to an hour north of San Francisco and everywhere in between. So when I can go, oh no, because that guy's face came right into my head. That was really aggravating and sad. Probably not a good way to work on your forklift. You could say technically you immobilized it in a roundabout way, but as you're working on the forklift, what has to be de-energized? Battery. Battery is a potential source of energy on top of gravity, which that's probably not going to be secure. Really, that's just in there because it's funny too. This is my new favorite picture. So what do you guys see?
The tire jack?
Tire is jacking up a truck with a guy right underneath it. Okay. Now, lockout. Why would this be a lockout tagout issue? The truck, yeah. Gravity. Absolutely. Now, both tires were jacked up that way. And so as I'm going with my iPad, he peeks out, looks at me, and goes, and then just goes right back. And then the alarming part was about 5 minutes later, his supervisor walks up, talks to him, hey, make sure, okay, thanks, and then walks away. So what else is common practice that the supervisor didn't even bat an eye? Electrical wiring methods. This happens all of the time. Frayed cords. How expensive are extension cords? Have they gone up since the last time I went to Home Depot? It's not going to break the bank. Cords, I don't want to really have that bump into me. Exposed wiring. And this one's really great if it's at home in your garage and you kind of splice together all different types of wires and cords and make your own electrical outlet. That's great in your garage. I'll applaud you, but not in the workplace. Okay? Ladders. This one, again, not to pick on the woodworking facility. Is this actually a ladder or is that part of a ladder to scaffolding? Leaned up against a Connex with another ladder going up here. We told them 3:30 on a Thursday. That needs to go. Okay, we'll get on it. At 4:30, we got a call because it was raining, an employee fell off this ladder, fractured his elbow. And I wanted to say some words that I couldn't because we're a customer service organization, but they deserved it. Not the employee, the owner. Ladders, again. This is me at Christmas time at home putting up the lights on the house. I'm guilty, but not in the workplace. And this one is a painter. This was actually around the corner from my house. Guy up high, has a cardboard box in one hand and a sprayer in the other, leaning over, putting the cardboard box up against the stucco and spraying the trim. Lean, 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 lean. That's pretty high up. I wouldn't even climb up there just like this. That's high. Machine guarding, okay? This is a little bakery place, exposed sprockets. How about an industrial mixer? What would happen if your hand went in there? It's definitely going to ruin your weekend. Belt and pulleys. For some reason, I've seen a lot of these this year. Metal cutting saws, unguarded. That happens a lot. How about a radial arm saw or a pull saw? Okay, on top of, this has to be guarded on both sides down here. Do you see how far you can pull that out? Comes completely off the table, which is a big no-no. Okay, so they have a couple of guarding, and again, do you think it's that same woodworking facility? Okay, bandsaws. It has a guard, but they don't adjust it down to the thickness of the actual wood that they're cutting. This is a deli. They have a meat cutting bandsaw, not using any of the guards and putting their arms right around the blade and their fingers. That's pretty dangerous. And you can't have a guarding one without an abrasive wheel grinder. And then lastly, electrical, exposed wires, makeshift covers, exposed outlets. I've seen these in doctor's offices in Beverly Hills. It's like, come on, really? It's 49 cents. Blocking your electrical panels. This is my favorite electrical panel of all time. Might not want to reach your finger in there. And then other things that make you scratch your head. Could you possibly access that emergency shower? Or if you have something in your eyes, go ahead and kind of walk the plank to try to get into somewhere to flush. Now, when I couldn't even tell you the last time that thing was checked. Okay, so I don't even know if it works. This is your employee break room. And you can see someone right here shoved a mannequin, which I just thought was really fun. And that's why I took the picture. But here's your employee break room table. And this one's just kind of funny. In an emergency, are you getting out there? Not so much. And then this one, let's just call it play a little game. Let's find the emergency exit. So yeah, right there, which you're not going to get access to. And this one is a medical facility. I didn't want to go look at their dumpster. Someone told me to look at it, so I did, and that's what we saw. Oh, you got to have one of those in there. Okay, so any questions or anything? I always end with the good one after lunch. This guy was taking a nap during one of the inspections, and I took that. He has no idea he's in a PowerPoint, has no idea I took his picture. Okay, well, any questions or anything? Katie's going to talk about discrimination for, it's like 2 hours, 3 hours. I'm going to leave for that, so you guys can enjoy. Okay, well, thank you very much.